The point today is to talk about 5 steps to start a venture capital firm in 2022. And those 5 steps are: 1, you need a compelling thesis. It is impossible to raise a fund in 2022 unless you have a good thesis. And I'll talk about all of these in a moment. Then you need to craft a strong track record for that thesis. And we're going to tell you how to build the track record for the thesis, okay? Once you have those two coming together, you start working on your materials. And this is a huge mistake that I see a lot of VCs make when starting a new fund. They kind of start with the materials, not with the thesis, and they do things out of order, and then they're spending tons and tons of time on materials. You should have all the materials you need for your VC firm in 2 weeks, okay? If you do it correctly. Then you want to pitch hundreds of leads, and you have to be careful because of general solicitation. And then last but not least, you want to run a fast closing process. Closing processes can take months. In the EU, they often can take a year, right? And you want to try and get that closing process down as tight as possible, because otherwise you're going to lose limited partners along the way. And I'll talk about that as well. With respect to a compelling thesis, it's going to take you at least a month of dedicated time to get your thesis in good shape. And I recommend you follow this very simple format, okay? It's Mad Libs for your thesis. Fund name and is launching X $1 million stage venture capital fund in wherever you're based to back, United States, European, Eastern European, whatever geography the fund will invest in. And then you pick a sector or market and you explain your secret sauce. And I'll go through each of these quickly. Let's start with the fund name. Don't name your fund until your thesis is finalized. Use a temporary name. Too many times people start a process, and by the time they finish their thesis, it's like way different than where they started, and the name is no longer relevant. So hold on the name until you get everything else locked down. Another huge mistake comes with the size of the fund. If you are on fund 1 in a developed market, your fund size should be between $5 and $25 million. If you go above that, right, it's going to take you a long time to fundraise, because when you're raising for fund 1, you're in the penalty box with limited partners of scale. So large limited partners do not invest in new managers. Okay, they just don't. They're prohibited in many cases by charter from investing in new managers. So you're in a penalty box. So if you have a very big fund size, you need to have very big LPs come in, but they don't come into fund 1. So you're essentially setting yourself up for absolute failure. So the number one cause for failure of a new manager is they have too large a fund size. And this is about half in developing markets. It's about 2.5 million in a developing market, okay? Now, stage is very important. You can do a multi-stage fund, but LPs don't like it, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So pick one stage: seed, pre-seed, Series A, Series B. Don't be like seed and Series A, or pre-seed and seed. A thesis is a directional statement of intention. It is not a law. So if you say you're a seed fund and you do a pre-seed investment, no one's going to arrest you, okay? It's okay to do a few investments that are pre-seed if you're a seed fund, right? Or even a Series A investment. So that's okay. You don't need to actually say it. But 70, 80, or 90% of your deals need to be what you say in the thesis, okay? So you have to pick a stage because LPs want it, and I'll show the data in a moment. And then you need to say where you are. That's super relevant because LPs are backing you. And if you're in New York or Paris or Dakar or wherever, you know, in New York, Paris, Dakar, etc., that's where you are physically located. And then you're going to fund companies in a geography, right? And this is also super relevant to the limited partners. And a thesis statement is 2 parts for limited partners, 1 part for the fund. So limited partners care where you invest because they have to pay taxes and file things where you invest. So if you're saying, hey, I'm investing all around the world, a lot of limited partners don't want to pay taxes all around the world and they won't invest in your fund. So you need to usually pick a constrained geography so for the benefit of your limited partners. And similarly, a constrained sector. And then you have to tell in the secret sauce why you are uniquely qualified to do this. Mike, do you want to add anything here?
The uniquely qualified part is super important, everyone. Look, you're competing with lots of people raising capital, and there's got to be something about you that makes you better than everybody else, right? If you're using the same thing that everybody else is doing, it's hard for an LP to go and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and invest in this fund. So, you know, a good example of this is I help, companies source employees. Okay. Every single, venture capitalist does stuff like that, right? And so it's not super compelling, right? So it's got to be something super compelling, and it has to be related to the thesis. So, if let's just say you've built a very successful career in healthcare and you're trying to launch like a crypto fund, there's just like, it doesn't make sense. There's like no connection there, right? So you want to make sure that it's like directionally correct with regards to where the thesis is at.
Okay, let's keep going. So I just want to show a couple backup pieces of data. Raise Global surveyed a lot of LPs and they asked, what are you most interested in? And 71% said they want a firm focused on one stage. Okay. Number 2, they like geographic specialization, but they really like industry specialization. Again, 72% of LPs want one industry. They like industry specialization, and they like geography specialization, and only 18% want a generalist. Remember, your thesis is 1 part for you and 2 parts for LPs. So you're really making a document to explain to LPs what you're doing concisely, or making a sentence in this case to explain to LPs what you're doing concisely. Okay, let's move on to track record. Everyone here has hopefully some kind of track record, because you really can't enter venture capital unless you have some experience in the startup community and some network, right? It's almost impossible as a student to start a venture capital fund. Though it's not totally impossible, it's almost impossible. Right, so you need some track record, but the reality is your track record might not match up perfectly with your thesis. So you have to make your track record, and that's why I say craft a strong track record. And the way that you do that is you create a deal warehouse. Okay, and we do a lot of this we work with you a lot on this in the VC Lab program. So your deal warehouse can have 3 types of things in it. You can take a deal that you've invested in, but you have to it can't be in a syndicate or an SPV. You have to have been an actual investor in it. And you can transfer that deal into the fund at cost. And that would be a previous investment. You can say, I'm going to start a fund in healthcare. I don't have that great of a healthcare portfolio. So you can make a current investment and transfer that into the fund as well. And if for whatever reason you can't do that, because maybe you don't have the resources to make an investment right now or whatever else, you can find amazing deals that are related to your thesis, and you can work with them so that they close their funding for this amazing deal around the time you close your fund, and then you invest upon your close into that company. So those are future deal warehouse deals. And we even have an agreement called a safe where you can sign it with the company to reserve you a position in that round. Okay. And here's the thing about this. Thesis aligned deals with markups that go to the fund get limited partners excited. So if you say, hey, we're raising for this new fund and we've done these 2 deals, or we have these 2 deals. Oh, and by the way, they're already marked up at a 2x. And when you come into the fund, you get that 2x. You better believe limited partners get excited. I've seen it myself over and over again. They get excited about the deal. They get excited about the markup. And this is better than track record. And you can do it right now, right? So track record takes decades to build, but you can build a deal warehouse in months. And if you get a deal warehouse where you have markups that are thesis related, it's the best thing you can do to close a new venture capital fund in the track record category. Okay, creating clear materials. This, if you have a good thesis and you start to have like interesting deals, your materials will be very quick to produce. It should take you no more than 2 weeks, maybe a month if you're really slow and you're doing other things, but you really should be able to get them done in 2 weeks. And here's what you need. You need a fund presentation, which is your primary tool for fundraising. As an option, it's a good thing to have a written fund overview, which could be 3 to 5 pages. So it's like a verbal form of the presentation that's maybe 5 pages long, right? You want to have your fund model, which is the economic model of how you plan to make money. And there's lots of model templates out there. And then you're going to have a data room with all of the above information, plus some logical things that limited partners might want in due diligence, the bio of you and your team, any references, any research on the market you're going after, and the like, sort of obvious due diligence things that a limited partner might ask for, you put in the data room. Now, there's something called a private placement memorandum, and this is a complex legal document outlining all the risks that can go wrong with a fund. And, you're going to be doing for Fund 1 and even Fund 2, you're going to be raising from, limited partners who are primarily like big angels and small family offices. I'll talk about this next. So a PPM is really required when you go after the larger limited partners like sovereign wealth funds, large family offices, endowments, and the fund of funds, things that they may require that you have a PPM. But for most people in Fund 1 and Fund 2 and even Fund 3, a PPM is a nice to have, but not required. And they're very expensive. They can cost $75,000 to produce. So we don't generally recommend that you do them. Now, of these things, the deck is the most important thing. So I'm going to talk about it briefly. You're going to need the following slides, and then there's some optional slides, right? But this is not a 30-page thing, right? You're going to have somewhere around 12 to 15 page slide presentation for your fund. And it will include all of the things in the needed slide category. Some you don't necessarily like. Market is a very, very good thing to have. So it's like, I put it in the needed category, though technically it's optional. So you These slides you want to have on a white background because LPs will print them. You want to have the titles almost exactly as you see them here. You don't want fancy titles. And you want to have like 1 point per slide that's very clear, because we have tracking systems that you upload your fun presentation into, and we look at how long LPs view a slide. It's less than 30 seconds. It's actually 10 to 20 something seconds per slide. So a lot of GPs are like, oh my God, I got to put like all this text on a slide, and then I need to have 3 or 4 graphs. That will get ignored. Okay. It's at less than 30 seconds per slide on average. So if you don't have simple slides with 1 killer point per slide, it will get lost on an LP because they're not spending the time. Step 4, which is pitching hundreds of leads. And this will take you a couple months. Now, could take you more than a couple months, but here's the issue. All right. When fundraising for a fund, want to build momentum. Okay. This is not a like, oh, I'll pitch someone this week and someone else next week. You want to be pitching about 20 LPs per week. And I'll walk you through how to get there. Or more, because you are in a momentum building exercise. So the first thing you need to do is you need to build your own network. If you don't have a few thousand followers on LinkedIn, you probably don't have a large enough network to even start a fund. So I would say LinkedIn is a proxy for your overall real world network size. And so if you're at like a few hundred followers on LinkedIn, not great. Look to build your profile in the business community to where you have 3, 4, 5,000 followers. That's sort of a good number. And if you have that many followers, you probably have other networks that are activated as well, besides LinkedIn, et cetera. So that's a good proxy. And the way you build your network is you're posting things, you're attending events, you're speaking at events. Mike, anything else?
Momentum is key as well, right? And so look, what's going to happen is, I know for some folks on the call here, it may seem a little bit overwhelming to talk about like hundreds of LPs and things like that. But what ends up happening is that if you got the right thesis, if you got all these things going for you, you're going to get network effects, right? You're going to be meeting LPs that like your thesis. They're going to tell other LPs. You're going to be meeting connectors that know other people. They're going to be introducing you as well. And that's how this happens. And it's all one-to-one combat, right? It's that level, right? It's not going to be, you putting this out on like a newsletter or like, certainly avoid general solicitation, certainly avoid.
Yeah, well, there's some questions in the chat about this. So about general solicitation, Mike. So I'll get to that. So look, build your network, guys. Post, attend events, speak at events, get out there as much as you can and whatever, mentor at startup accelerators, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's how you build your network. And then you're going to have rich friends, hopefully. And that you trust, that you've known a long time, and we call these individuals confidants, and you should practice with your confidants. And if you don't have a rich friend, find someone who's prominent in the startup ecosystem that you're friends with, and practice with them, because practice makes perfect. Okay. Once you have a strong network and you've practiced a bit with your confidants, then you want to go out to people that know wealthy people. We call these people connectors, and you want to talk to them about what you're doing. You're not pitching the connectors, and you reach out to a connect. No general solicitation. I'll go into that in a moment. So you reach out to them and say, hey, I'm working on something new. I'd love to get your feedback to your confidants. Confidants, get on a call with them and say, I'm thinking of launching a venture capital fund. I'm thinking of doing these type of things. I was wondering if you know anyone that would be interested in speaking with me about it. Based on talking with your confidants, checking with connectors, you're going to form an image of an LP archetype. This is what does your ideal limited partner look like? They're probably in your industry. They might have been an exited CEO, blah, blah, blah. You create the archetype, and then you just start using the connectors, the confidence to find more and more people in your archetype, and you get to pitching 20 people per week. And you should probably do this over roughly 2 months. Now, general solicitation is prohibited in most of the world. And that means you can't post on social about your fund. You can't have a fund website. You can't cold outreach to limited partners. And there are different rules in different places. There are different rules in Europe. There are different rules in the US. So if you're in the US and you pitch a European LP, you're bound by the rules of the US and the rules of Europe. Okay? So now you got 2 rules to contend with. So the general rule is don't solicit. And so here's how you navigate that. Number 1, you have to have a relationship with whomever you're pitching. So establish a relationship first, okay? And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm giving sort of general things to do as an individual pitching LPs. Number 2, you need to pitch only wealthy people, because a lot of US, Europe, et cetera, Asia, they don't want, and I don't necessarily agree with it. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm certainly not a regulator. They don't like venture capitalists and other people pitching people who are not wealthy for money. So you have to ensure that the people you're pitching are wealthy. And there's accreditation standards in the US and other standards in Europe. Ironically, the European standards are higher. And then if impossible, the person actually asks you for information. So those would be the 3 best case scenarios. Again, you know the person because you got to spend some time with them. You're certain that they have resources, and last but not least, they ask you for information. Now, one of the tricks that we recommend for venture capitalists in particular is that when you're pitching someone and they express interest, that's what's called circle. And in the world of venture capital and actually all fundraising, there's something called soft circled and hard circled. The problem in venture capital is a lot of people will say, yeah, I'm interested, and they're really not interested. They're just trying to like keep you in some sort of limbo state. It is the hardest fundraising that you can do. So we've created a document called the Pact. You can look it up, and maybe Mike, you post a link to it in the chat. And it's an agreement that's takes someone who's soft circled and puts them into hard circled. It's non-binding, and it's just like what's called a letter of intent. So it's the letter of intent for an individual to invest in a fund that doesn't exist yet, right? But what it does is it moves someone from a soft circle category to a hard circle category, and you need to know this because of closing. So you want to run a fast closing process, and this is the last point, and hopefully this is useful for everybody. You don't start closing ever until you have at least 10% of your fund hard circle. Okay, so if a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to invest. I might invest $100,000 into your fund. That's a soft circle, right? You need to have at least 10% of your fund hard circle. The ideal definition of hard circle is they signed something like a pact. If not, then they've written in no uncertain terms that they're going to invest in an email or something like that, and you are certain they're going to do it. And that's hard circled as well. So when you have 10% or more of your fund hard circled, then you start a closing process, and you want to try and get this closing process done in a month. And you know, there's some domiciles in the world, like Europe, where it's just technically impossible to do it in a month. But so that's why Europe is a very unpopular domicile compared to like the United States or Canada, where you can definitely do this in a month. Asia can be, you know, Europe, I'd say fast country in Europe is maybe 6 months, and Asia can be a year or more in Singapore and many domiciles. Okay, so the first thing you do when you have 10% hard circled or more is you secure your formation vendors. This will likely be a formation partner or law firm. You might need a back office provider, and they're possibly a tax and accounting provider as well. Some limited partners, if you get in the larger fund sizes, will require an audit, which is expensive, and that's why you'll need the tax partner as well. Once you have your vendors locked down, and we can help with that, there's lots of vendors, you engage your limited partners and say, hey, everybody, it's been a few months, we're gonna close. Would you like to see the documents before we close? So you engage them, you let them know you're closing, you ask if they want to see the documents. You get the closing materials, which is a lot. There's a lot of documents to close a fund. This is not like, oh, I'm going to close a fund. It's like, oh boy, I'm going to close a fund. Closing is hard. It's one of the hardest things you can do.
And you have to work with specialists that have done this a lot, right? So if a lawyer has formed a bunch of PE funds, that doesn't mean you should work with them for a VC fund, right? So you need very, very specialized service providers that specialize on doing VCs, ideally smaller fund size VCs.
So you're going to get like the mega load of, I remember the first time I saw an LPA and signature, and it's like hundreds of pages of incredibly dense legal documents that you will not understand. You have to read it all and try and understand it the best that you can. That's step 3 here. Then you're going to set up your entities. That's actually kind of a pain in the butt as well, because it's not one entity, it's usually multiple entities. There's extra regulations. Once the entities are set up, you go for a bank account. Believe it or not, the bank is one of the hardest things to do. This is not setting up a business account, a personal account. They do extensive KYC on you, on your LPs. They sometimes I've seen forms from banks that are dozens of pages long to set up a venture capital or private equity bank account. Dozens of pages. And it can take, in some jurisdictions like Europe, months, not weeks, months to set up your bank account. All right. So setting up the entities in some jurisdictions takes months. Thankfully, in the US and working with us, we have partners, we can get it down to like a week or 2, right? And that's why closing can be consolidated into a month. Then when all the entities are set up, your bank account's in place, you go out and you secure the signatures from your limited partners. This can, again, sometimes be very quick, matter of days, but it can also take a matter of weeks because some limited partners are slow, and you're always going to have limited partners that have told you they're going to invest and don't invest. And you'll have limited partners that you don't think will invest that do invest. And this is a very stressful period of time when you're getting the signatures. And then you initiate your first capital call when you say, okay, I have enough signatures. You got to file a bunch of government paperwork and you do your first capital call. we recommend you do a capital call right after you close, which is asking your limited partners for money, because you don't know who's going to invest right away, and you don't know who's going to take more time. And the only way you're going to find that out is by doing a capital call. So do your first capital call after your close. And if you have warehouse deals ready to go, you're going to need the money to make the investments anyway. Okay, so I wanted to show you here a fun diagram very quickly, because these are complicated entities that you're setting up. You need to understand how they interoperate. And this is not something that you can just roll out of bed with someone who doesn't understand how venture capital works and do. You need real experts to work with you on this, okay?